Okay, now we're gonna get the real goodies. All right. So, we did the juniors and we did the specials, and now we're gonna talk about my favorite guitar, which is the what I consider to be the real Les Pauls. In 1954, Gibson decided they were, well actually, let's go farther back. In 1952, they made what was called the Les Paul model. And it was what became the standard, but at that time it was just a Les Paul because they didn't do a custom. They weren't doing, any other higher end guitars. So it was just the Les Paul. And what I'm going to show is the very first version of a Les Paul. It's unbound, which means there's no binding. And supposedly the first 50 or so didn't have binding. I don't know if anybody really knows. Probably less than 100 without binding. So anyway, yeah, this is an early 52. This is also one of my favorite guitars. I like player guitars. I don't like guitars that are super clean because I don't want to be the guy that puts the scratches on them and feels bad. And plus, I really do like to play them, so, often the better sounding ones seem to be the ones that are already played. Maybe that's just a mental thing, but it seems to be true. You'll notice this guitar has no binding on the neck. And it also has horizontal screws holding the P90 in. And no ring, no switch tip ring. It also has a certain kind of tuners that were only used on the really early ones. This is like goofball minutia stuff, but the tuners don't go all the way through. And if I was to open this guitar up, the routing is also different than all the other guitars. So for a while we were doing conversions. We were turning broken guitars. Most of them were 52s and 3s that people weren't fans of. And we were turning them into bursts. And the ones that we would convert would be these early, not the real early ones, but 52s. And I could always tell by the routing. The routing in the early ones is different. You could get on the internet and look that up. Okay, so in 52, they make a gold top, which is what's known as the standard now, but at that time was actually just the Les Paul model. And it has Les Paul's name on the headstock. And I'm going to just kind of ramble off some of the features of the early ones. Very low logo. Tuners that don't go all the way through. That's an early thing, and you also see that on Fender Broadcasters. The tuners don't go all the way through. Horizontal pickup screws. And the super early no binding feature. The cool thing about this guitar, I was with my friend who now owns Rumble Seat Music, and we were at a show in Asheville, and we used to share booths, and we used to buy stuff together. This is years ago. This is probably 94. He might not even have a store then. Anyway, this guitar came in, and the guy was a fan of, I think it was Hot Fudge. Norma, what's that band? Vanilla Fudge. Yeah. So he claimed this was his guitar, and I had no reason to lie. And Elliot bought it, and I was just starting to be obsessed with Les Paul, so I talked Elliot out of it. And then years passed. I kept the guitar. One of the reasons I like it is because it has a Bigsby. And early 52s have wraparound tailpieces normally, and I'll show you that in a second. But anyway, I eventually talked to Norma, and I told him I had this guitar, and he was like, man, I don't think I ever owned a Les Paul. I was like, what? You never owned a Les Paul? I said, no, I don't remember ever owning a Les Paul. So then I looked on the internet, and he's like, there's a million pictures of him with Les Paul, so I don't know why he didn't remember it, but... Yeah.
What's the story on the bridge on that? I mean, when you've got the long wraparound tailpiece from the 52s and 53s, I know what that looks like. But when they put a Bigsby on it, what does the bridge look like? Is it a short tune-o-matic?
No, it's actually a big one.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
It's a floating Bigsby bridge. So underneath that bridge, there's no holes.
Oh, so it just sits on
It just sits there.
So it's like a
Yeah.
aluminum
Exactly. Yeah.
You keep mentioning that the tuners don't go all the way through.
Right.
And the field.
If you look at these tuners, there's a hole on the end of these tuners where the post goes all the way through. The really early ones don't. It's just one of those things that I look at and I know that it's an early one. And it's the same way with Fender guitars, like the broadcasters and no-casters. The tuners don't go all the way through. Not a big deal, but it's one of those things. Okay, so this is what everyone thinks of as the first Les Paul. This is a 52. This guitar I bought from the original owner. I never changed the strings. It's still got the flat wounds on it. The case is really clean. It's a good guitar. I mean, it's clean, it plays well. The problem with these guitars is when they string them up, they go underneath the wraparound. And also, this bridge is floating, so you can move it over. And if you play hard, it moves. So it's not a great concept, you know. That being said, they generally sound really good. I mean, they sound great. And if you can get around that, you know, if you're playing like Social D and you're like pounding the chords, it ain't gonna work out. But you know, for like early blues guys, they played these guitars, you know, they played them with these big giant flat wounds and they sounded awesome. The early cases were like this. They were flat. Notice the top is flat. There's a whole bunch of stuff with cases that I'm not going to get too detailed in, but there's what they call like 3 latch, 4 latch, 5 latch. As time goes on, they get more latches, they get more arched. But this is an early case. They only did this case for the first year. And it's, you know, often they're not this purple looking, they're often more pink looking. That guitar has original hang tags, the strap, key to the case, an original Gibson pick. And if you notice, the tag just says Les Paul, because like I said, at that time there was no standard, there was no custom, there was only the Les Paul. The reason I brought this guitar, even though it is the exact same guitar as the last one, it is a 52, is because it's an all gold variation. Sometimes they painted the back of the guitars. No one really knows why. I think there was probably multiple reasons. I think some people wanted them to be this way because they thought it was fancier, you know? So it's like flashier thing to do. Some people believe there was a knot in the wood they was trying to cover up. I'm not sure. But you'll notice this guitar is really brown. It's turned very brown for some reason. This guitar came from Florida. And I've noticed when I buy guitars from Florida, this happens. The finish has weird reaction to the air in Florida or whatever. Seriously, I mean, I bought a ton of guitars from older people down there, and they often have weird finish issues. The all golds tend to be harder to sell because what happens is the gold finish, this finish actually has bronze in it. It has the metal bronze, like a dust powder. So when you sweat through the clear and you wear the clear off, it turns green, just like copper. And it gets kind of rough and, you know, sticky, and it's kind of hard to play sometimes. To some people, it doesn't bother me, but some people think it is. So for that reason, I've personally found that all golds are kind of hard to sell. You guys can't tell this, but when I've been picking these guitars up, I've been noticing that like majority of them are like less than 8 pounds. Some of the juniors are like 6, they weigh nothing. This guitar is probably 12. It's a freaking lead boat. I bought this guitar from a doctor, and I don't know if he ever played it, but so it's basically, the reason I kept it is because it was an all gold. One more thing I want to say again is notice how low the logo is. It's like almost an inch down into the neck. As time goes on, they pull the logos farther up. So
Do those strings not wrap around the bridge?
they go under it. Yeah, just these bridges go under it, and then they just set on these floating things. They're not, so like right now I could scoot that over, which is why most people didn't like these guitars. Les Paul didn't like them. But that being said, it's still a pretty freaking awesome guitar. I mean, it sounds really good. And P90s are amazing sounding pickups. You'll notice there's no ring. When we're talking about cases, there's kind of, I think, an opinion that's not real. That often, like, if a case is, okay, let's say you buy a guitar in 1954, and it comes in this case, which is a flat case. The reason that happened is because guitar dealers, evil guitar dealers, they would go in the back room and they would get rid of the older cases, and they would keep the new cases. So this case is actually the case that I got with my 59 Les Paul Snake guitar from Brad Whitford. And you'll notice it has like all this Jimmy Page backstage, Eric Clapton at Albert Hall, the Stones. I mean, this was the case that guitar was in, I'm sure, since day one, even though it's a 52 case. So people didn't really want the burst. They didn't want the humbucker guitars as much. So they were just cheap used guitars at the time. Okay, this is a 53. So in 52, they made those guitars with those wraparound tail pieces, and a few of them were custom ordered with Bigsby's, like that one. And then in 53, they also continued that on. So we're going to skip the early 53 model, because it would be exactly the same as that guitar. The only difference between like a 53 with the wraparound and a 52 is it would have a ring. Okay, so it's a little change there. But this is the next significant change of the Les Paul. They go to a wraparound tailpiece. This is also called a wraparound instead of the archtop wraparound. And to me, these guitars are magical. They sound great. These are one of the best guitars ever made. Once again, when Gibson went to making this model, often the angle was bad. So the early ones, this guitar doesn't have that issue, but often the early 53s, the bridges will be sitting on the body all the way down, and the strings will be sky high. And there isn't anything you can do about that. It's just a bad technique, you know. Well, yeah, you can go down that road if you want, but and the bridges are often very thin. This is like a guitar that I play a lot. I've refretted it. This is probably not the original bridge. It's a little taller than they were. But, you know, this time period to me, if you get a good one with good angle, is like one of the best guitars ever made. He asked me, what happens to the value if you refret? Well, if it had been 20 years ago, I would have said, don't ever refret your guitar, blah, blah, blah. If it's really clean, okay, let's say it's the second guitar, still got the original flat wounds, you know? You're not gonna refret that guitar. You shouldn't refret that guitar. It would hurt the value on that guitar. But the first guitar, well, maybe not that one, because it's a historical, important guitar. But if you're gonna play the guitar and you don't like the frets or they're completely worn out, it's not a negative. You just wanna make sure it's done right. Don't put a big, gigantic jumbo fret on the guitar and tear the fretboard up. Don't mess with the binding, you know, have someone that knows what they're doing. And in my opinion, it doesn't hurt the value. Somebody may feel it does, you know. If you're gonna play it, it needs to happen. Okay, when we go to 53 and we go to that tailpiece, the cases change. This is what you'll see throughout 53 and 4. It's kind of, I would call it like an hourglass kind of shape. It's arched on top. It's 4 latches. There was various different cases. Everybody thinks they're all lifting cases. It's just not true. They made different cases and got them from different companies. Most of them were lifting, but they're not always lifting cases. They just look similar. Okay, so as we get into the later 50s, the guitars, the Les Pauls become more and more popular. Rock bands are starting to use them. Rock and roll is becoming a big deal. Electric guitars are becoming a big deal, you know? And as time goes on, these became more and more popular. And the improvement on the guitar from the trapeze wraparound to this wraparound is huge. I mean, it is a very useful guitar. It's like hard to improve on this guitar. It's so good. I personally feel they just get better, you know, all the way up until the SGs again. But this one is a 55. We skipped 54 because the difference between a 54 and a 53 and a 55 is a whole bunch of little stuff, where the bridge moves and all that stuff, but it's basically the exact same guitar. So this is a 55. You'll notice it still has these knobs, these giant barrel knobs. And once again, the bridge is a slightly different place. Still have what they call single line tuners without, they do not say anything. Later on they'll say Clousson, now they don't. I've changed the tips because they shrank. And I don't know if it's just my personal experience, but for some reason that 55 year was a really hard year to find for me. I don't know why. I don't know if they didn't make them any or. Cases. At this point, we're into what people think of as the normal cases. In 55, they go to this case, which is basically the Les Paul case that we know of today. Still 4 latches. It's got the handle, says Gibson on the outside of it, arched on top, with the little metal things on the back. The cases don't change a whole lot from this point. Most of them are in this cases, although there's different variants, which I'll show you later. Okay, I thought I didn't bring a 54, but I lied. This is a 54. And like I said, there's not really much difference. You'll notice the bridge is wider, but otherwise it's the same guitar. Okay, now we're past the wraparounds, and we start getting into the new technology. They came up with what they call a tune-o-matic bridge, which is what this bridge is. And all of the higher end guitars got them. You know, juniors were still like we saw with those bridges. But these guitars, the standards, at this point they were called standards because in 54, Gibson made a custom. So from that point on, they started designating the gold tops as standards. Not really 54, more like 55 or 6, but this guitar is this one's a 57. I did not bring a 56, but it's exactly the same guitar. Once they put the tune-o-matic and the stop tail on, they never moved that. It's not like the Raps where they moved them around. They had it pretty figured out at this point.
The stop tail as they are there, or wrap those around the red post?
Some people like the top wrap. I really do think it changes the tone. A lot of people I know do that.
Do you think that?
I've never had a problem. I mean, if you got enough from leaning, posts rarely lean, honestly. You know, it happens more like on like 330s and those kind of guitars. I'm gonna pass this guitar around. This is another rare variant because it's what they call dark back. You see how dark it is? So they made an all gold and they made a dark back. No one knows why. You know, no one knows why they did it. I actually believe it was probably just someone in the factory that liked the way this looked. But it could be that there was a knot in the wood. The dark backs have the same problems the gold ones did. The finishes on the neck get really rough. Personally, this guitar, this time period with the tune-o-matic and the P90s, you would think would be like an awesome guitar, but I never could fall in love with this time period for some reason. I always prefer that one in some ways better. And the reason I brought this one as opposed to a late 55 or a 56 is because it is a dark back, and it's the last of the P90s. In 57, they go to humbuckers, which we're going to look at in a second. And I've refretted this guitar, and I tried my best to fall in love with this guitar, but it just didn't work out for me. I'm going to pass it around. The one thing I'm going to say is the Les Paul silkscreen on these guitars, it comes off really easy, so it's hard to see. And often people will try to wipe off the dust or whatever. Don't do that, because you can actually wipe off the logo and it's already half gone. But you'll notice when you come and look that the logo is coming up a little bit. Look at the 52 and the 54 or 5, and then this guitar, and it's moved. That's a cool guitar. It's light. It's very light. Yeah, it's probably 7.5, 8 pounds, and it's a great guitar. Okay, so we're in the 57 now, which everyone thinks of as this guitar. This is a 57 gold top with 2 PAF humbuckers. Probably one of the most desired guitars in the world. The PAFs are just magical pickups, and Ted McCarty, who made these pickups, was a genius. I don't know what to say. I mean, it's got the tune-o-matic, it's got the stop. They discovered these humbucking pickups. And the reason they came up with those humbucking pickups is the P90s are giant single coils, like a Strat or Telly. They're really big single coils, and they hum. So, you know, I guess people complained about that, so they came up with this concept. What they didn't know they were doing is creating a pickup that was the ultimate rock and roll guitar, because these guitars have smooth distortion and gain, and people just love them. This one is a natural back, and one of my favorite guitars. I don't play this one very much because I have a 58 that I love, but you notice the plastic parts. These plastic parts are worth a fortune, because these rings were only on early gold, or 57, 58, 59 bursts. I've seen these rings sell for $10,000. It's crazy, because these rings go on a $300,000 guitar, and you can only get them from this guitar, which is probably a $100,000 guitar. So yeah, I mean, they make replica rings of these that sell for $500, just like new ones.
Mike, what's the fret size like on 57?
Yeah, it's just like the early ones. The 58 is even a burst. Even a 58 burst has small frets.
I knew we were getting into that change.
Yeah, that's right around the change. The late 58. I've seen some that people claim were original frets that were like 59 frets. I actually think it probably didn't happen until 59. He asked, do we know what month the humbucker came out? I'm sure someone does, but the history of Gibson is so confusing and so convoluted, and people take credit for things they didn't do, and they were always very, I don't know how to word this. It seems like to me they always purposely made things confusing. It's like I said, why would you have same serial numbers on a bunch of different models? It's just crazy. So, for whatever reason, a lot of the history is lost. And once burst became a big deal, and then, the burst guys, my friends, started like hunting those guitars and making a big deal out of them, the serial number logs for those guitars disappeared. So the logs from 58 to 60, the burst guitars, those logs are gone. This is what they call Cali Girl case. If you notice the shape of it, you guys figure out your own reference. But that's this case started happening in like 56 randomly up into 58. Another company, they just, for some reason, they were randomly in these cases. Okay, this is my main guitar. This is a guitar that I use almost all the time when I play Les Paul. Either this one or the snake guitar. And this is a 58. It's the most beat Les Paul that I own. I just love it. It's a great guitar. It's the last of the gold tops. You know, kind of a higher logo. The neck is, most people think 58s have giant necks. They really don't. That's a myth. Kind of medium sized, you know. It's not that different than a 59. When I got this guitar, it was covered in black soot. I mean, filthy. You can still see some of it under the knobs. And my repair guy cleaned it, and like for 2 days, he cleaned it. It's a great guitar. It just sounds amazing. I've refretted it. I'm gonna pass it around. You guys can check it out. This is another 57. I have no idea why I brought it. Oh, I know why I brought it. Okay. Another weird thing they used to do is occasionally they would make a guitar without a maple top. This is a 57 gold top without a maple top. All the customs were all mahogany. This is a rare guitar because it's all mahogany. You normally wouldn't notice that, but when I bought it, I was looking at the top of it and I was like, the grain is strange. So I took off the back cover and looked at it, and it's solid mahogany, which is a rare thing. Another strange variant. This is also a 57 Les Paul, black parts. And if you guys are familiar with Joe Bonamassa, he's a cool guy, he's a buddy of mine. He has one of these guitars, and he had his reissue made of this guitar. So this pickguard is basically the same pickguard that would be on the custom, except the custom has 3 pickups, so it'll be cut right here, which we'll look at in a few minutes. This one is a dark back, also random, no one knows why. Interesting thing about this guitar is if you look really closely, it has darker spots in it. And I don't know if they were trying to cover up something or if it just faded, but I've had a lot of these black pickguards or researched them a lot. They're often in the same serial number pattern. So I think they were probably making a batch of them that day. My friend Tom Riplock has one. I think it's like 2 numbers away from mine. The weirdest thing about this guitar is I found a picture of this guitar in some Japanese Les Paul book or something, and it had cream parts on it. Now, no one would ever put cream parts on this guitar because you'd have to spend a fortune to buy the cream parts to put on this guitar. So I'm not sure how that happened, but I'm sure these are the original parts. When I got it, it had these parts. It's all the ones that have these parts have these serial numbers. So maybe the guy had 3 guitars, he switched them around, or maybe the number was wrong in the book, I don't know. This is another light one.
Is the pickguard warping because of the same?
It is warping a little bit. Happens with the blackguards because they're multiple ply. One ply shrinks more than the other and it makes it pull up. Okay, so we're going to continue on with the standards. We're done with the gold tops now. We're into the humbuckers. This is the first Sunburst Les Paul. This is a 58. There's a whole bunch of things that are really hard to explain about this, but in 58, they came up with the Sunburst pattern. They were already doing Sunburst patterns on other guitars. They were doing them on arch tops and stuff like that. No one really knows why they started doing that on these guitars, but this is like a super important step in Les Pauls. This is what they call the burst. Often the 58s, like this guitar, a lot of them are plain, and they tend to have like a pink kind of hue to them. A lot of them faded. When I say plain, I mean the amount of figure in the wood. They're what they call plain tops. There's not much figure. A lot of 58s are like that. This guitar came out of my buddy's collection, and it's one of the best sounding bursts I've ever had. I've refretted it. It's just a really good sounding one. Another thing I'd like to talk about real fast is when they go to PAFs, the very first PAFs on 57s they have different covers. They're really square. They look different than once they go to that. Okay, this is a 59. This is Snake. This is the one that they made my reissue out of, which is that guitar down there. This guitar belonged to Brad Whitford and a bunch of other Les Paul collectors over the years. It's a very highly figured maple top, which is very desirable. And these guitars, most of them don't have this maple top like this that has this much figure. They're almost all like the one we just looked at, which is a plain guitar. Best sounding Les Paul I've ever owned. I just love this guitar. And not much to say. I mean, it's just really a good one. Yeah. Oh, you notice that it's very faded. And you know, it's not real. This guitar, in different light, it gets its color back. You know, can you tell with the darker I get, it starts coming back? That's one of the cool things about them is they change depending on where you are. It's pretty faded, but I would say in today's standard, it's not really a lemon burst. No, it's got some red, especially up here. If you took the covers off, you would still see some of the red. So, a few years ago, my friend Greg Martin communicated with me and said, Gibson's doing a series called the Collector Series. They want to know if you want to do any of your Les Pauls. I said, sure. A process started where we talked about different ones, and they knew I had Snake, so they asked to do that one. Flew me down there, and we looked at a bunch of guitars. We decided to do this one. And then, in the course of a couple years, we looked for tops for these guitars. Actually, I didn't. Edwin, who was the head of the custom shop, did. And he flew around the United States to find tops. And this is the first prototype of this guitar. I had to sign off on this one. So we did our best to make it the best we could. One of the things that was the hardest was to get the color right, you know. I think we did a pretty good job, you know. You're never going to get the exact maple top. I mean, it's just, there's no two exact pieces of maple. But we can get the color as close as we could. I'm going to pass this one around. Okay, so 58. Kind of a big round neck. 59, similar neck. The guitars in certain serial number periods are flamier than others, it seems like. If you see like a 099, which is Snake is 0799, 3-digit numbers tend to be flamey. I don't know why. And then there's some other time periods where they're flamey. So when somebody calls me and they say I got a Les Paul standard and tell me a serial number, I have kind of an idea what the wood's going to look like because I've seen so many from that number series. But anyway, this is early 56. It's 2171. This time period is always kind of thick and wavy flame. People think these guitars are all like the reissues. Like if you look at the Snake reissue, how the figure's crazy. But in the real world, this is about as flamey as they get. This and Snake are about it. They're not, because they didn't care about that stuff that much. This is double cream PAF, someone's taken the covers off. This is a guitar I've had a long time. It's my favorite 60 that I've ever owned. The neck starts to get wide and thin. You know, it's a typical 1960 thing, but it still has all the color of 59. Basically all 59 features except for the 60 neck. Okay, so after I ended up buying all the Les Pauls and I had everything I wanted, I was instantly bored with it. As soon as I got done, I just started selling them. The first ones I sold were the very last burst, like what they call tomato soup. This is not one of those guitars. The very last bursts were really red because they discovered that the red faded, so they started making it a solid color. And I never really liked those guitars. I found them ugly. So I sold them off, so I don't have one here. But this is the last of the 60s. One of the last bursts I ever bought. This came out of Indiana. It belonged to a band called the Cliftones, I believe, which was the last band on King Records in Cincinnati. They were the last band ever signed to King Records. The guys had 2 Les Pauls. They both had Les Paul standards. The other gentleman had since sold his when I bought this one. You know, I have pictures of them playing the guitars in 1960, so it's pretty cool. This guitar fell down the steps at one of their gigs and got a headstock break. But you'll notice that it still has a lot of color. Great sounding guitar, very skinny neck. The necks get skinnier as you go into 60. And this is a Les Paul standard. The very last Les Paul standards were SGs. So this is a 61. This is what happened to the Les Paul standard. Sideways tremolo system, or vibrato they called it. When you pushed it in, it worked like a strap trim where it gave it the effect. Horrible idea. But very cool looking. You know, these guitars look fabulous. And they sound good. I mean, they really do. A lot of people use them for slide. They made some with stop tails. Just randomly, they would make one every now and then. I didn't bring a lot of customs because just like with the standards, the same thing that happened to the standards happened to the customs. The first ones were what they call Alnico guitars, which is what this guitar is. They have a P90 and an Alnico pickup. That was the feature of a custom, was this pickup. The really early ones have super wide necks, which is what this guitar has. I mean, it's like classical width. This was the most expensive guitar in the Les Paul line at the time. This was way more desirable than a gold top. They were more money, and they were considered more fancy. They had gold parts on them. They were solid mahogany. They do not have maple tops. And the early ones don't have serial numbers. Just like the early 52 Les Pauls don't have serial numbers. This is actually a very late 53, which is super rare. And it's one of the widest necks. Once I saw a 54 Les Paul without a serial number, and when you took a black light to it, it had a serial number, which is weird. What they did was they actually put a black serial number on a black guitar. So you couldn't see it until you ran the thing over it. But the early ones don't have serial numbers. This one doesn't have one even in black light, but I did see one like that once. So, yeah, you guys can check this one out too, because it's a really weird guitar.
Is this what they would have called a fretless wonder?
That is a fretless wonder, yeah. Yeah.
It really feels.
Yeah, feel how wide the neck is? It's like really wide. He asked me about blacklighting a guitar. And there's a lot of misconception about blacklighting guitar. People call me all the time, put my guitar in a black light, and this doesn't look right, that doesn't look right. The truth is, 2 things. A black light will do nothing if there's nothing wrong with the guitar, or if the finish is completely redone, it will do nothing. It will look exactly the same if it's refinished, if it's not refinished. But if half of it is refinished, that half will look different. So, people can say, I blacklighted my guitar and it looked great. Well, the whole guitar could be refinished, and you're not going to know it from a blacklight. So there's that. I mean, is that what you want to know? Yeah. Okay, this is the first of the 57s. I didn't bring a 55 and a 56 because they're basically got Alnico guitar. The necks get narrower, but otherwise it's exactly the same. This is a 57 custom, one of my favorite customs. It weighs nothing. I like light guitars because I'm old. These guitars randomly had Grovers, especially in 58, they had Grovers. Sometimes they didn't, sometimes they did. A lot of the customs came factory Bigsby. This is actually what they call a Mickey Baker, which is a really, really rare version of a 57. See the knobs? They only made a handful of these. It's 3 volumes and 1 tone. Yeah.
pickups by volume?
Yeah, you can. It's a great idea because on the other guitars, on these guitars, which is what all of them were, unless you ordered something weird like that. This position is this pickup. This position is these two pickups. And this position is this pickup. And occasionally, I don't know if they would wire them wrong, they would make like this pick be this, or sometimes this position when they're both on, they would be out of phase, you know, and completely original that way. So that idea never really hit it off with most people. The third pickup, especially rock players, most people didn't like it because you couldn't get like that. Those two pickups by themselves, and that's a cool sound in the middle, you know, which for that reason, you know, I don't know why, but maybe because the standards were so much prettier. These guitars never really became like super popular, even though they were the higher end guitars. Jimmy Page played one, and sounds fabulous. And who? Frampton, yeah, Frampton was a guy, I think he was 57. He told me the story about getting it back and stuff. This one it's a 57 with Grovers. Like I said, they randomly had different tuners. Grovers were considered an upgrade at that time. And this is another version of the 58. This is a guitar that I also paid way too much money for, but it's really cool and super rare. And I bought it from the original owner, and it's a two pickup one. They made very, very few two pickup ones. Once again, nobody knows why they made a few that were two pickup. Probably because someone ordered it, would be my guess. This guitar has all the hang tags. It's super, super rare. When I bought this guitar, it walked in the Texas Guitar Show, and I literally fought people for it. Because it was one of the few guitars I knew I was never going to see or have a chance to buy again from the original owner. What's that, Rich? Yeah, all customs have black cases. Yeah, it has like the original hang tags.
What was the original price of the custom?
Yeah, I don't remember the original price. It was one of those things that I used to know and forgot. I think they were like $230 or something. The other guitar was more. It has like an instruction manual on the humbuckers and, you know, tunematic bridge instructions. It's cool. Very, very rare guitar. And this is another version of, you know, a custom. Like I said, a lot of times they had Bigsby's. I tend to like the ones with the stops, so I think I have some Bigsby ones, but I didn't bring them. So, you know, this guitar is very played. You'll notice that it almost looks like it has nickel parts, but it's just gold. It just wore off. The gold on these guitars wore off really easy. Gold is a very soft metal, and you can just wear it down really easy. This one is just like, there's something about this guitar. I don't know why. It's one of my favorite ones. Really cool one. If anybody's got any questions, let me know. Come up, look at things. Anybody?
What did you say the stock wiring's like in the three positions?
90% of the time, or 95% of the time, you have lead pickup.
Okay, by itself.
Yes. Middle position is these two.
Yeah, okay. That's what
And probably
I've seen.
5 or 10% of the time it's out of phase. Yeah, I mean, a lot of times it's out of phase. Sometimes the middle position is the front two pickups, but most of the time it's the back. And then just the neck. And we're down to the very last guitar. This is a Les Paul Custom. For some reason, when they went to the SGs, they went white. This is what became of the Les Paul Custom. Is a white pickup SG model. Gold parts. You know, really super cool, fancy guitar, you know. I really like them. A little too flashy for me, but you know, it's a cool guitar. Weighs nothing. Grover tuners, impressed serial number, all the same features that happen to all the guitars happen to the customs.
What year is that one, Mike?
This one is a 61, I believe. It's because of the white paint, it's hard to read the number, but it's a 5-digit, so probably.
So you could get a Les Paul with either waffle tuners or Grovers.
Exactly. Like this one has waffles and that one has Grovers. Same year. Just random. I've probably someone, because both of these guitars that have Grovers are the Mickey Baker and the 2 pickup, they probably ordered the extra. If you could afford to order your own special model, you've got the best tuners. And I've just got a few more weird things to show you guys. And I just want to say that, you know, often people will read books and there's a lot of bad information that Gibson only did things a certain ways. The truth is Gibson did stuff a million different ways. And they did all kinds of crazy stuff. And guitars walked out the back. They did weird colors and changed models. And employees took guitars home. And all kinds of stuff like that happened. So I'm going to show you a guitar. It's kind of like a controversy amongst Les Paul collectors. Supposedly the very early Les Pauls, even before the early gold tops, were sunburst. And I've seen probably 5 or 6 early 52 Les Pauls that were sunburst. I have one I'm going to show you in a minute. Half the people in the Les Paul world, the people who know, think they were sent back. That like when the sunburst guitars came out, the gold top guys said, I don't want a gold top, I want a sunburst. And they sent them back and they made them sunburst. I don't buy that. People all over the United States did not decide to send their guitar back to get a sunburst. I just don't believe it. Another thing about this guitar that I'm about to show you is every one I've ever seen, and I've seen probably 5 of them, they all have the same tailpiece. They have the same features in a lot of ways. They have the same knobs, they have the same pots. I believe they made a batch of sunburst ones, or when they were done with the trapeze tailpiece, they tested some sunburst guitars. So that's what this guitar is. So, this weird thing that you're seeing right here is a very typical Gibson thing that happens. I have kind of a collection of oddball guitars, and half of them have this weird piece of plastic either covering up holes or something. It's always this pickguard material, and it's usually cut in some fancy design. This guitar I bought out of the back of a music store up in some place up north, like Cleveland or something, and it was like tucked away. You know, the guy didn't know what it was. Every one of these sunburst ones I've ever seen, they all have 53 pots, early 53 pots. They all have tall knobs. They all have this weird tailpiece. And a ABR1 bridge that's skinny. It's super skinny. They only did that on like 335s from the factory in 58. And also I have a prototype 54 with this same bridge. So I believe these left the factory just like this. This guitar is like brand new. I mean, it's got the original flat case.
Is that a 3-piece top?
Yeah, it's a 3-piece top. That's something we didn't talk about. The early 58 sunburst guitars, which I think we put up, is there's some that are 3-piece tops. Like the Lucy guitar that Harrison played is a 3-piece top. There's a couple more that are solid cherries that are 3-piece top. But in general, Les Pauls were considered to be, center seam. By the time they go to sunburst, they're considered to be all sunburst center seam guitars. Another prototype thing. I believe this guitar is original, not sent back. But who knows? Nobody really knows. Does anybody got any questions or anything?
Why wouldn't that fade like the 58s and the 59s?
Say what?
Why didn't that fade like the 58s and the 59s?
Why didn't it fade? That guitar never saw daylight. It was literally in the case in the back of the store. And the 58 and 59 would have looked like that.
Right.
If you notice how pink the red is, that's the way the 58 would have looked. Early guitars, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Does the hang tag, etc., increase the value, or is it all in the guitar?
Yeah, hang tags increase the value, sure. Yeah, often players will not care as much as like strict collectors. If the guitar is really clean, if it's something super special, it's always nice to have the hang tags. Like this two pickup one has all the tags, you know. Things that go for a maximum are kind of so special that people might not believe them. It's always nicer, you know, hey, here's the tag, man, you know. It's like, but not a lot. I mean, you know, if you had like a 53 that was mint and another one that was mint, and one was heavy and one was light, and the heavy one had the tag, people still gonna buy the light one. Yeah. So that's it, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, let me know.